Hi, this is my review of Era the Consortium Core Rulebook. Era the Consortium is a science fiction role-playing game that feels a lot like the bridge or the middle ground between classic space opera and modern science fiction. Let's talk about the quality of the PDF. There are many good things in terms of quality, but I did find some things that could have been improved. I found some typos and errors, and I sent the list to Ed Jowett, so those things can be corrected in the future. And this PDF has no hyperlinks or bookmarks, so it's incredibly difficult to navigate this PDF when running a session. And the two indexes at the end of the PDF are great and quite handy because you have a story index and a gameplay index, but without the hyperlinks they are a bit useless. But those things will be added in the future. Ed Jowett told me that he has plans of incorporating those things that will make navigating the PDF incredibly easy. And now, the illustrations in this PDF they're just beautiful. It's pure eye candy. They feel like windows into this vast universe of chaos and order, of political intrigue and freedom and tyranny. So that's really nice. Probably one of the best looking science fiction PDFs that I have seen. There are illustrations in full color, so that's quite nice. And the rules are explained quite clearly as well. And I also like the graphic design or the layout of the PDF. It feels kind of like you're reading from a sort of like a holographic screen of sorts. Now let's talk about the contents of this rulebook. First, you have I'm quite surprised at the level of detail and colorfulness of the lore and mythology of the game. You have a history of the entire of the universe where Era the Consortium is happening, and the story is quite interesting. Basically, humans, after many years in the future, they are flying across this space in this ship called the Kurmaya, which is basically like a colonization ship. And eventually they find this planet, and there are many stories related to heroism and a bit of opportunism or trying to get advantage over the other humans, because all of the humans have been under this effect of sleeping stasis, and this stasis has erased part of the humanity's memory about life on planet Earth. So some are taking advantage of that. Basically, a lot could have been of a specific rank or profession before, but now because they are amnesiac, they really don't know what's their rank or their status or what was their profession. They just have like snippets of technical information, cultural information, etc. And you see humanity trying to define this planet and trying to rebuild society. They make a city out of the parts of the Kurmaya of the spaceship, and they start to thrive in this new section of the universe. Eventually, humans find other alien races or species. First, they find the Ulusians, and the Ulusians are kind of like squid people. They are quite technologically advanced. In fact, they consider themselves such as like guides for humanity, and they are helping humans, like uplifting them to a better way of life, at least when it comes to technology. Further on, they find this other species called the simians, and this interaction isn't as peaceful because there is a lot of cultural differences between simians and humans, and it starts with a very violent war, which eventually ends up with the triumph of humans and Ulusians teaming up together against the simians. And it ended up in a quite gruesome way, quite questionable from a moral or ethic point of view. And then they find this other species known as the Velithi, which are at first are kind of like carnivorous plant people, but humans uplift them into a better way of life. They turn more civilized, and they are basically these species of creatures that can change shape and incorporate technology into their wooden bodies. Each race is quite interesting, and you have basically all the information of each race, their ideals, the way they live, from a political standpoint, from a cultural standpoint generally, etc. You have all the information you need to role play any member of this species. And probably the central part of the entire of Era the Consortium is the conflict between the corporations and the Senate and the resistance later on. Basically, the government that the new humanity established is based on the idea that the more economic power that you have, the more political power, which is quite obvious. And the corporations are usually pointing out where the Senate did something wrong to take power away from the Senate, and then it's the Senate's turn to blame the corporations. And there's constantly a shift of power. And eventually the corporations take more control over things, and they start acting a bit selfish. They start exploiting humans. They don't treat them like valued customers. They treat them like slaves. And of course this resistance pops out and starts opposing the corporations. And there are many other events that you can find in these 500 years of history. And the cool thing about this lore, this mythology, is it's basically a breeding ground for adventures and campaigns. You can use any section of this timeline and have a campaign in that section. You have all the information to build a solid structure around your campaign. And there are many places that you will wish to explore, because this is a universe where all the races are living together across the different planets. You're going to see structures that combine the architecture and the culture of all the different species. I read a part that I really liked about this high security prison, and it seems quite nightmarish. It's certainly an interesting place. So for example, you want to create a campaign where the characters are prisoners. It's going to be quite difficult to escape from there. And I'm also quite pleased with the amount of technical information of the different planets, of the ships, space stations. The mythology aspect in general is just perfect. It's like you get a campaign setting included with this rulebook. Now let's talk about the mechanics of the technical aspect of this rulebook. Character creation is quite easy to understand and very clear, and it allows for a lot of depth when it comes to role playing. Because you have all the different races, you have humans who are quite adaptable and versatile. And you also have the Evolutions, which are these like squid people that usually wear suits that make them look like humans, and they have an advantage underwater, of course. And you have the Simians, who are these like ant people that are very strong, and they're divided by castes, and depending on which caste each character belongs, you have different strengths and weaknesses. And the ability can have the ability to change shape as they need it, according to the mission or wherever they are going to do. So all the races are quite exciting to play as, and you have all the informations to create their backgrounds, character statistics, specialties, and all the information to level up those different characters. This is not a class-based system. You can build any character that you like, and it's more on a hard sci-fi sort of way. That is, you won't get magic or over-the-top psionic powers. Everything feels somewhat materialistic in a way of speaking, and the point buy system feels quite balanced. You really you create an interesting character with quirks and different backstories, and the quirks have advantages and disadvantages. For example, your character could be a bit of a coward, but because of that, your character is also quite skilled at stealth and hiding, so that's very nice. And you have a really large selection of implants, equipment, vehicles. You have weapons, melee weapons, ranged weapons, explosives, power armor, shields, vehicles of all sorts, land vehicles. You have spaceships. It's just a huge selection, and you have all the information to make your own. In fact, the author of the game encourages you to create your own stuff, but the things that are here are probably going to last you for a lot of years if you use them sparingly. Uh, however, I highly recommend that you tinker around with the stats and create your own weapons and implants. And now, when it comes to the rules of the game, to the core system, it's basically a 10-sided dice system. You roll a bunch of 10-sided dice, and you try to achieve a number of successes to succeed at a particular task. And this number of dice is determined by your attributes and your skills depending on the task at hand. And combat is pretty much the same. And what I like about combat is that it feels streamlined and complex at the same time. That is, it's easy to understand, but there is a lot of depth to it. And for example, your opponent has a defense value and it imposes a penalty upon your roll, and then you make your roll, and according to the weapon that you are using, you get a number of hits. And depending, there are two thresholds, and depending upon which threshold they go over, your character or your enemy could end up dead or just hurt. The player characters are a bit tougher than the average enemy, than the cannon fodder, but there are some grittier rules, optional tweaks that you can use to make the game more dangerous, more lethal. However, I found these optional rules to be really hard for the player characters. They're going to die quite easily, so just use them if it feels like the player character is having too much of an easy time when fighting against different enemies. As to the type of adventures that you can have in this game, you can have any type of adventure that you want. Maybe your characters are members of the resistance, they are fighting these evil corporations, or maybe they are agents of a corporation fighting and carrying out assassinations and espionage missions against other corporations. Or maybe your characters are part of a police force within the Consortium and are just keeping the streets safe. Or maybe your characters are explorers finding new planets, trying to further the advancement of the entire society as a whole. And something that I really like how they handled is that even though the humans have a bit of an edge or more prevalence as a species over the other species, that is, humans are more numerous, and these humans are quite more advanced in the way of planning. But the other races also feel like they don't lose the spotlight, so it kind of feels like they grabbed a real-time strategy PC game like StarCraft, and they mixed all the races together, and they start to create this unique space culture of sorts. And you have a nice selection of a gallery of NPCs that you can use as allies or enemies. However, I didn't find a nice list of flora and fauna that they could find in planets, that is like maybe carnivorous plants different from the Belithi, or some more dangerous animals, or strange alien creatures. So of all the adventure frameworks that I can think of, space exploration isn't going to be as smooth as campaigns related to espionage and political intrigue and war, because there isn't too much of a selection of beasts, but you have the information to create your own. That's good. Now, you also have a lot of information that you will find useful if you're a game master, a lot of advice and suggested campaign frameworks. They tell you how to carry out different campaigns based on the events of the timeline. Maybe you want to have a campaign that features the origin of the Consortium, or one that features the corporations, another one that features the bug war between humans and simians, or maybe a campaign more in the presence where the resistance is fighting, etc. So the PDF really wants you to get in there, to start playing this game right away. You have all the tools that are needed, and it feels very complete. Now, let me tell you what I think of ERA, the Consortium Core Rulebook. Well, I think this is a good game. It's surprising how it has that old school feel to it. At sometimes I felt like this is probably what would have happened if the old World of Darkness team from White Wolf had decided to design a science fiction game. But the way they streamlined the D10 mechanic, especially for example, they streamlined the grapple rules. I really like that, and the damage. How combat is carried out and resolved quite easily without having to look at charts or checking modifiers all the time. That's very nice from a mechanic standpoint, and the lore and the mythology is quite impressive. This is probably going to become a very good set of thematic elements for your campaign. If properly handled, this mythology could go far. In fact, I saw there's a comic book for one of the more dramatic events in the storyline, the Stiletto unit, if I'm not mistaken. And so this mythology can be expanded in many exciting ways, even though through your homebrew campaigns, or if they plan some future expansions. This is a mythology with a lot of potential, in my opinion. So if you're looking for a role-playing game that has a lot of classic space opera science fiction elements with more modern things, or that feel more like hard sci-fi, Era the Consortium is the way to go. Well, thanks for watching my review. If you have any comments or questions, please let me know. See you later.